And if you go back to the Bush-Gore election, if Vice President Gore had won one other state, he would have been the president. Even if it was the three votes in New Hampshire, that would have thrown the presidential election from President Bush to Vice President Gore. So these can be very important. Now, there were actually, let me just briefly, we've discussed the Constitutional Convention and the Constitution. The 12th Amendment changed the voting rights, and we're going to discuss two elections. One election, the election of 1800, happened before the 12th Amendment, and two other elections, the presidential election from 1824 and the vice presidential election from 1837, happened after the 12th Amendment. Now,
okay, hold on 1 second, because I can edit this one. Go back to do typing. When are you going into the elections?
Whenever you want me to.
No, I'm just trying to. Keep it.
I would say right after we go into the 12th Amendment, we can go into the three important elections.
Okay. When you get through with the 12th Amendment, let's stop it there, and then I'll wait a second, pause, and pick right back up, and then we'll go into the three elections, and I can edit that and have two different videos.
Okay. So basically, going back to the Constitutional Convention, what would happen is the electors would select the votes for both the president and the vice president. And there were some issues here in the 1796 election. Now, the 1796 election, John Adams and Charles Pinckney were the Federalist candidates, and Thomas Jefferson was the Democratic Republican candidate, whatever you wanted to call him there, the anti-Federalist candidate. I'm drawing a blank on who was the vice presidential candidate in 1796, but it's really not applicable. So basically, what happened was Adams won the popular vote. Excuse me. Adams won the electoral vote. Pinckney, who was Adams's vice presidential candidate, should have won the electoral vote for vice president. However, and this is the issue here, in 1796, a number of the electors, though they voted for Adams, refused to vote for Pinckney. So, so when the electoral votes voted, they voted the majority for Adams, the second amount of votes for Jefferson, and the third amount of votes from these basically faithless electors to Pinckney. So this is the first time that the president and the vice president were from two differing parties. Now, the only other time the president and the vice president were for two different parties was in 1864, when Lincoln, president, was from the Republican Party, and Andrew Johnson, the vice president, was from the Union Party. And however, Lincoln and Johnson did run together on the Union Party, but not on the Republican Party. But that's
Johnson.
there.
You said Union for Johnson. Johnson was a Democrat, remember?
No, but Johnson ran on the Union Party, even though he was a Democrat, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Previously, he'd been a Democrat. He'd been I think he's the only senator not to leave the South, correct?
That's correct. He was the only senator. He was a senator from Tennessee, and he did not, and he stayed as the senator from Tennessee in Washington after the state of Tennessee seceded from the Union. But the issue was, whatever Johnson was running as, he was in effect he was not a Republican.
Right.
Now that was the first problem, but that did not necessitate an actual change in the Electoral College. So the next election, the election of 1800, was
one of my favorite.
It was one of the favorite elections, because what happened was Thomas Jefferson, who was running for president, was running with Aaron Burr, who was allegedly running for vice president. They were running against Adam and Pinckney again. So when the electoral votes were counted, Jefferson and Burr had the same amount of electoral votes. Now, they were both the Democrat Republicans.
It was arranged that one person was supposed to not vote, right? So that
that was
the president would be elected.
That would have been the easy way to do it, and that's what the Federalists had decided. So the Federalist votes were: Adams got a certain number of votes. Pinckney got one vote less than Adams, because there was an agreement that one of the electors from Rhode Island was not going to vote for Pinckney, but was going to vote for John Jay. So if the Federalist had won, Adams would have been president and Pinckney would have been vice president. But
let me ask one question. So Jefferson was running for president. We know that. Well, in Burr's mind, was he like, "Hey, I'm running for president too"? Since it was all voting for, they was all getting this. Huh?
Well, probably Burr realized what was going to happen, or what was supposed to happen, but Burr, being the power-hungry man that he was, said, "Look, I have a chance to be president too, because I'm going to get the same amount of votes as Jefferson." So basically, I'm going to throw this election into the House of Representatives, and that's exactly what happened. The vote was thrown into the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives did 36 ballots. And on the first 35 ballots, Jefferson and Burr got the same amount of votes. Obviously, Adams was third, Pinckney was fourth, and John Jay was fifth. But that didn't really matter, because we had to decide the president and the vice president between Jefferson and Burr. Now, there were appeals to Federalist electors to vote for Burr instead of Adams, Pinckney, or Jefferson to make Burr the president. Well, that never happened. The
Wow,
Federalist,
but there were some deals going on in that place.
right, but the Federalists stood pat and continued to vote for Adams, Pinckney, and Jay. Now, between the 35th and the 36th vote, there was an agreement reached between Jefferson, Hamilton, who was a major power broker on the Federalist ticket, and probably Adams, to throw enough votes to Jefferson from Pinckney and or Jay to have Jefferson be elected president. And basically on the 36th ballot, Jefferson was elected president and Burr was elected vice president. Now, this issue was basically a standoff forever, so to speak, in political terms. So what the 12th Amendment did, it specifically stated that the people running for president and vice president would be officers in and of itself. And if there was a non-majority in the Electoral College for president would be decided by the House of Representatives. And if there was a non-majority for vice president, the vice president would be chosen by the Senate. Now, the difference was...
I didn't know that. You told me that earlier.
Pardon?
I said I didn't know that until you told me earlier today that the vice president would be chosen by the Senate.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing is when the election is thrown into the House votes by state. So if it would be thrown into the House, if the 2020 election had been thrown into the House of Representatives, there would have been only 50 votes. And the District of Columbia, even though it has 3 electoral votes, would not be included in the House of Representative votes. And the winner would have to receive the votes of 26 House delegations, because that is the strict majority. Now, it could be 26 to 24, or some delegations don't show up, that's fine. The quorum would be 2/3 of the House, which would be figure whatever 2/3 of 50 states is, they would have to be there and voting. But even if there was a mere quorum, 26 votes, a clear majority would have to go for the candidate for president in order for the candidate to be elected. Now, in the vice presidential race, if it would go to the Senate, Chris, are you with me?
Okay.
Okay.
Because the file was cutting in and out, so it had to go to audio only.
Okay, so if the vice presidential debate would go to the Senate, basically the Senate would have to approve the vice president by a pure majority. Now, what are the issues? One, again, there's the same 2/3 quorum. So 51 senators would have to vote for the vice president. Now, the issue is, if it's 50-50, some legal scholars believe that the vote keeps on going until it becomes 51-49 or 51 whatever. And some legal scholars believe that the vice president would cast the deciding vote.
What do you think? What's your opinion on it?
Personally, I think it keeps going. I think it keeps going until the senators make some sort of agreement and vote 51 something.
But the vice president's still in office, though.
But the vice president is not a member of the Senate, and even though he's the president of the Senate for voting purposes, he's not a member of the Senate, and this specifically says members of the Senate. So
Okay.
if it ever happens, then it would necessitate a Supreme Court ruling as to what it means. What it means.
Interesting.
So, there has been one vote that was forced into the Senate, and that was in 1837. So it was the 1836 election. And what happened was 23 Virginia electors refused to vote for Richard M. Johnson for vice president. And therefore, Richard M. Johnson received 147 votes, I believe. And that was one half of the votes in the Electoral College, but it was not the majority. So he was one vote short. So this election was thrown into the Senate. It was after the 12th Amendment, and the senators voted majority for Johnson, so there was no issues. Now, the first and only presidential debate that was thrown into the Senate was the 1824 election, and this was an election between four Democratic Republican candidates. Andrew Jackson received 99 electoral votes. John Quincy Adams received 89 electoral votes. Crawford from Georgia received 41 electoral votes. And Henry Clay, the great compromiser from Kentucky, received 37 electoral votes. So we have
now
four men.
Why did that get? I'm sorry. Why did that get put in the Senate?
Pardon?
Maybe I misunderstood you. Did you say that race got thrown in the Senate?
No, this is the race. This is the other race that got thrown into the House.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The reason I said the Senate was probably because Henry Clay was a senator.
Got you.
So what happens is, in a presidential race that goes into the House of Representatives, and this is by the 12th Amendment, only the top three vote getters are considered. And that would be Jackson, Adams, and Crawford. And Clay's votes would not be considered. Now, Clay hated Jackson, so he threw all of his support behind Adams. Now, just to jump off again, in the Senate, where if a vice presidential vote is thrown into the Senate, only the top two vote getters are on the ballot. But let's say there are ties. Would there be more than two people there? Again, we don't know. If that ever happened, it would probably go to the Supreme Court for an interpretation. But we do know that in the 1824, on the very first ballot, the House and the winner would have needed 13 states voting for him for the House. On the very first ballot, Adams received 13 votes, Jackson received 7 votes, and Crawford received 4 votes. So that's why Adams became the president in 1825 based on the House, the only actual bipartisan, so basically, but probably not, race that was ever thrown into the House of Representatives. So interestingly enough, those are the 3 races. One, the 1800 race between Jefferson and Burr that was under the Constitution, and the other 2 races, the 1824 presidential that was thrown into the House of Representatives, and the 1837 Senate race that was thrown into the Senate pursuant to the 12th Amendment.